Scrapwood challenge, Scrapwood challenge. It's scrap, it's firewood, but summer wood is good.
Today I'm going to start making a chair. I've never made one before. I've got no idea how it'll turn out, but I'm going to give it a go. I have a bit of an idea how to make a chair, but there's plenty of ins and outs I'm really not sure of. So I bought a book, The Chair Maker's Notebook by Peter Galbert. It's a complete guide with excellent instructions and illustrations, and I'll put a link to it in the description. I really like the look of the chairs in the book, and I could have made one of those from the provided plans, and I probably still will, and I'm sure it'd be much nicer than my attempt. But because this is a Scrapwood challenge, I'm going to use camphor laurel from the original Scrapwood pile. None of that's thick enough for those designs without laminating pieces together, so I've come up with my own design, which is a bit more lightweight. I'm not going to go into too much detail in this video as I'm really not the right person to teach how to make a chair, but I'll give a brief outline of what I'm doing as I go. I've already made my design for the seat on paper. Now I need to transfer it onto the seat itself. After marking out the shape, I'll mark the leg positions, the spindle positions, and then the sight lines that I use as guides when drilling the holes for the legs. Using the sight lines along with a square, a bevel gauge and a couple of mirrors, I can now drill the holes for the legs to fit into. The mirrors allow me to view the drill in front of me and to make sure that it's upright by gauging it against the square, and with a glance I can view the required angle against the bevel gauge on the other mirror. I've shown this method with more detail in a couple of past videos when making stools, and I've even made a sawhorse this way, and I'll put a link above if you need more info. I've taken the sight lines around the edges, then transferred them to the other side of the seat. This will help me keep the reamer at the correct angle, which is my next step. And the reamer makes the hole into a tapered mortise, which will make a secure joint with the leg tenons. I got carried away there and drilled the spindle holes all the way through the seat. I also realised they weren't wide enough. I decided to re-drill them, but before I could do that, I needed to plug the holes with dowels. Next I'm going to start making the legs and the spindles, but before I do that I've just spotted kangaroos over the road and I'll see if I can get some footage and see if I can get a bit closer. The scrap wood is all between 30 to 35 millimeters thick, so I'm trying to find the pieces that have the straightest grain and are the thickest pieces to make the legs from. I've tried riving the camphor laurel in the past and it really doesn't split well, so I'll be cutting the wood down to size for this project. I'm no wood turner and I've never used the skew before. I thought I'd give it a go, and although I reckon I could get to grips with it, I did resort to sanding them as I couldn't quite get the finish straight off the tool. Here I'm cutting tenons onto the end of the legs. I'm using my homemade tapered tenon cutter, and I'll put a link to the video on how to make one if you're interested. Even though I don't need the spindles yet, I'll continue to use the lathe and get those made too. I need to make them on the lathe as the grain isn't quite straight enough to shape them with a draw knife and the spoke shave, which is the correct way of doing things. They're a bit whippy on the lathe being so thin, but going slowly worked well and they turned out fine. I'll put the spindles aside for now and start shaping the seat, which is the part of the project I've been looking forward to. There were a couple of areas of squirrely grain that even the card scrapers were struggling with, so I resorted to sanding again. I didn't use a power sander anywhere on the whole project though, everything was sanded by hand. I am looking forward to making another chair with more suited wood where I can go for a tool finish. With the legs back in, I've levelled the chair up and now I'm marking the positions for the side stretchers. I'm going to drill the mortises for the stretcher tenons, then turn the stretchers on the lathe to fit. The lines I'm marking here will be guides to level the legs while drilling the stretcher mortises. This simple jig holds the leg in position while drilling, and the guidelines I marked on the legs are set parallel with the workbench top by adjusting the jig in the vise. I then use the board I used to mark the legs as a guide to drill the holes. Here I'm turning the side stretchers, then I marked and drilled the mortises in those to accept a centre stretcher. To help find the length of the centre stretchers, I used elastic bands. I measured across the centre points, then I made the stretcher slightly longer than that. I'm nearly ready to assemble the lower section of the chair. First I need to make wedges, then cut curves in the leg tenons. I'm using Titebond 2 to give me more time than normal yellow glue, so it'll make it easier to assemble it without it going off too fast. The Crest Rail is the final piece. I don't have equipment for steam bending and I didn't want to do a glue lamination, so I found a piece of wood with curved grain that was close to the radius I needed. At least some of the grain should run through the whole piece. I'll drill the mortises for the spindles before cutting the crest, as it's easier to clamp it down. With the crest seated on the two end spindles, I can mark the other spindles, then add enough for a tenon and then trim them to final length. I put it back together to check how the crest looked and then made adjustments and did my final shaping. For the finish, I'm using a mix of varnish, linseed oil and terps in equal quantities. I've only put one coat on for now, but over the next few days I'll put a few more coats on. I thoroughly enjoyed this project and I'm very happy with the outcome. I learned heaps, and thanks again to Peter Galbert for making such a wonderful book. If you have any interest in making a chair, be sure to check it out. I'll put a link in the description. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.